Good morning everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Now, today's video is a what we eat in a week video. I do try and do these twice per shopping period. So we live off-grid about 4 hours away from where I do my shopping, and every 6 weeks I go and do the shopping over 2 days. 2 nights, 3 days, sort of a time span. I go and stay with my mum. I'm really lucky that my mum lives in Brisbane, so I can go and stay in her unit with her. And I do 3 days. So I leave here on a Wednesday, and then Wednesday afternoon I do any sort of errands and appointments that are needed, whether it's obscure stuff. Last month I had to go to the optometrist, things like that, and Kmart and that sort of thing. On Thursdays I generally do Aldi, Woolworths, Coles, which are all grocery stores, any other stuff that I have to pick up for the kids. Like this month, it's coming into winter. It was zero. It got down to 0 degrees Celsius last night, so we're definitely hitting the cold weather. And I generally buy them some new winter pajamas every winter because they're children and they grow out of the previous ones. So I try and get a couple of years out of them, but it's always nice to pull some new ones in too. So I will be doing that, grabbing them some more winter clothing, some winter jammy pants mainly is the main thing that they need. And the cheapy stores, the dollar stores here, have some fleece pajama pants that they had last year as well that everyone really loved. So I'm going to buy them again because they were quite cheap. They were like 2 for 15 or 2 for 16 or something, which works out quite cheap when you're talking about 8 people's pants. That was a bit of a ramble, wasn't it? Okay. So Thursdays I do all the grocery stores, and then Friday I do the fruit and veg, the butcher and Costco on the way home, and then drive home in the afternoon, unpack it all and film it all for everyone. So I am going to try and do some filming while I'm shopping this month because everyone requests it, but I really struggle with it. So we'll see how I go. But I will try and take my phone around and take some footage without getting anyone else in shots and things like that. And we'll see how that works. But it'll be a lot warmer in Brisbane too, which will be nice. So yes, groceries this week. And I always try and do a what we eat in a week video for the last week of the 6-week period. So because we only shop for 6 weeks, we only really get fresh fruit and veg at the beginning of the month. The end of the month becomes a little bit more challenging. We use a lot of stuff off the shelf, a lot of stuff that's been frozen and things like that. So I always try and do what we eat in a week at the beginning of the month, and then at the end of the month to show the comparisons. So this is the last week-ish of our 6-week grocery haul and what we ate. Now, I only really film 2-ish meals a day. I say this on every video, so feel free to skip every what we eat in a week video. So feel free to skip it if you're not new here. But I generally film 2-ish meals a day. Darryl and I only really eat 2 meals a day. We eat mid-morning to lunchtime and then dinner, and have coffee for breakfast kind of thing. I might have a piece of fruit if there's fruit. The kids eat multiple times a day. They have breakfast. I've just made them porridge this morning before I came out and did this. So they eat breakfast, they eat whatever we eat for lunch, they eat dinner as well, and then they have things like rice cakes or baked goods or whatever throughout the day as well. But I don't record all of that. All I'm recording is the main meals, mostly because it's just too much work to film the rest of it, to be honest. So I purposely try and film the main meals, and even sometimes I miss them because we have leftovers or whatever. So I try and get 7 days with 2-ish meals a day to share with you, to show you the main food items that we use and make do with at the end of the month, and to give inspiration for anyone who is looking for ideas about things to do. So it gets a little more monotonous towards the end of the month, I find, because we're using some of the same products that we've got left, the stuff that we've got left from the end of the 6 weeks. But I always try and make it interesting so the kids enjoy eating it. So come along and see what we ate this week at the last week of our 6-weekly grocery haul. And if you're interested in seeing this month's grocery haul, it will be out on Saturday. And I've got a few more videos after this showing the planning and lead up to the groceries as well for this week before we get to the shopping. So come along and watch if you're interested in those as well. So here we go. Let's get started. Alrighty, for the first day of this 7-day period, We had for lunch or breakfast, as I said, it was the first meal of the day for Darryl and I, and lunchish for the children. We had leftover focaccia. So I make sourdough focaccia overnight, generally speaking, and I must have had some left over this day. I toasted it up on the cast iron pan and then scrambled some eggs, fried some ham up, and then we had the scrambled eggs and fried ham on the focaccia. Now, the focaccia sort of needs to be toasted if it's been left like this, because I would have put it in a sealed container overnight, which makes it go soft on the top and bottom. It's not preferable, but I don't have... Well, I'm looking at building a meat safe of some sort, something where I can put things like bread and that safe away from any sort of pests and rodents and dust, but still open air. We'll get there eventually, but for the moment it was in a sealed container, so it was a little bit soft and damp, so it's always nicer to toast it with the scrambled eggs and fried ham. So this was just some ham that was left in the fridge from the groceries, the single pack hams, so I fried it off just to make it a little bit more interesting. You'll have to excuse the pajamas. I think they pop out a few times in this 7-day video because it's been so cold in the morning that I haven't been as quick to get dressed, so excuse the pajamas in there. For dinner that night we had pizza, so this was overnight sourdough pizza dough. I have got a video coming out in the next day or so that shows a week in the life of my sourdough starter, so to complement the live that I did recently with the Aussie homesteaders, to show you how I use my sourdough starter over in a family rhythm type thing. So there's a fair few sourdough things in here because I was showing that weekly rhythm in a different video. So I'll go into more detail about anything that's sourdough in that video, and I'll just sort of skim over it in this one. So we did pizza. So again, it's sourdough pizza dough, so it was done the night before. The pizza dough was already in the fridge for the day to use, so I pulled it out half an hour before ready to make the pizzas. I used zucchini butter as the pizza sauce because we are out of pizza sauce at the moment and I haven't had a chance to make any. And I had some zucchini butter in the freezer. Zucchini butter is delicious. There is a video on my channel somewhere where I've made it. It's basically just zucchini cooked down with herbs and spices and butter until it is this luscious green sauce. It is delicious. It works really well as pasta sauce, but it's really nice as the base of a pizza too. It's sort of herby and green. It's lovely. We had some salami left. We had home canned pineapple, some tin corn. Everyone comments on the corn on the pizza. I really like it on pizza, but I like corn on anything, so, you know, and it's a veggie, it's good. And then some bacon, and then I had kefir cheese. So we used the Baker Stone pizza box thing. It goes on top of the barbecue burners, and it has a ceramic pizza stone inside it. There is a review on the channel of it. I didn't like it when I first got it. I couldn't get it hot enough, but I have mastered it now, in my opinion, and we get some really perfect pizzas out of it. So this is my one being cut here, so it's got cheese on it, and you can see how light and airy the crust is on it, and I used some bacon salt on it as well, which again, that's another video that should come out this week. Bacon salt, mushroom salt, and green citrus salt as being made up. The sourdough pizza crust is well and truly worth making. I sometimes get slack and do same day pizza crust. When I make the sourdough one, I wonder why I don't go to the effort, because it is just really that good. Day number 2. I don't have any lunch here, but I think that's because they had leftover pizza for lunch. So I make 8 pizzas. I make enough pizzas for everyone to have one themselves. And I'm not entirely sure what Darryl and I had. I obviously didn't film it. So I'm guessing leftover pizza, mostly, because as I said, I make a single pizza for everyone, and then whatever they don't eat, they stick in the fridge to use cold the next day. For dinner that night, we had the pesto pasta. Now we have this, most of my What We Eat in a Week videos will have this pasta dish in it because it gets requested heavily by Orpheus mostly. Orpheus really enjoys it. And it's a very simple dish that even Surreal can make on her own as well if Surreal's making dinner. So it's a standard sort of dish that we always make, and it's based lightly off the Jamie Oliver's summer wonky pasta dish. So we use 6 egg yolks with the pesto, lemon juice, some cowboy candy, bit of olive oil in a bowl, and you whisk it all up. Then you cook off your pasta, and you can use whatever pasta you want. We use sourdough pasta sometimes. The kids use spirals. Today they asked for spaghetti. That's just what the pasta that they chose for today. So you cook off the pasta, and then when you add the pasta to the egg yolk mix, it cooks the egg yolk mix into this lovely, luscious, creamy pesto sauce. You add a little bit of the pasta water into the sauce as well to loosen it up, because sometimes the egg yolks and the pasta, it ends up a bit gluggy. So you use the pasta water to loosen it all up and thin it all out. And then that's it. So this particular time there was no meat served with it. They didn't mind, and we just didn't have anything on hand. I regularly have marinated chicken thighs that I freeze, and I purposely pull them out, defrost to serve up with this. I think they had pulled pork with it last time they had it with anything out of the freezer, but they can have any sort of veggies or meat with it if they choose. They just chose to have it plain this day. It's really nice with the fresh spinach in it, but anyone who's been around knows that my garden is just not doing anything at the moment, so I don't even have spinach or silver beet to shred up and have with this, but really nice with fresh spinach in it too. Day 3, in the morning we had sourdough bagels. So again, this is an overnight dough that I make, and I'll go into it further in the sourdough video that I'm doing, but it was an overnight proof and then shape in the morning. So I shape it all in the morning, and then it gets boiled and baked in the morning as well. It's a fairly time intensive thing, bagels, but we really enjoy them when I do them. So long as I can plan to have the morning available to do that and I don't have to have anything else done, then it works really well. We made some fresh mayo, so I do immersion blender mayo. Again, I think there's a video about how I do my mayo on the channel already. So I do immersion blender mayo using duck egg yolks is my preference. I cook some bacon and eggs off, and then we had bacon, eggs, mayo on those fresh bagels. I do the everything but the bagel seasoning for the top two. I mix that up to use for that. I think there might even be a video about that. I'm not sure. I'd have to have a look. But I make the seasoning mix and dip them in that when I'm baking them. And then I really like that sprinkled on eggs, even if it's not on a bagel. So it's always nice. So that was lunch. For dinner that night, we did tuna bake. So I do a simple white sauce, dairy-free white sauce. Use ghee or coconut oil or Nuttall or whatever you want as your fat, and melt that in the pan, and then add flour to it. And make a roux and a white sauce just like you normally would. So whatever fat you want to use, lard, ghee, coconut oil, Nuttall or dairy-free margarine or butter, whatever, and add your flour, make your roux. Then add the chicken stock and coconut cream for us. That's what I use. So I use a couple of jars of my chicken stock and the end of a can of coconut cream, and then water as needed to get it to the consistency you want. You want to whisk it the whole time. Standard white sauce. Once I've done that, I also add the liquid out of a tin of tuna. We buy the tuna in spring water, so it's just water with tuna flavoring, which, you know, you're making a tuna bake, so that makes sense. So I use that water in the dish as well, and get it right. Then I add a bit of salt and pepper. I used a bit of the bacon salt in this that I use, which has a blend of different things in it. Again, you'll have to excuse the roosters this morning. And then I will add the recipe for the bacon salt when I get that video up for you. And then a big tin of tuna. Sometimes I use 2 tins of tuna. It depends on how much I'm making. I had only intended to make 1 tray this particular dinner, so I only used 1 tin. And then the frozen diced veg. So, you know, you diced your peas, your corn, your carrots. I think this has diced potato mix in it too. Just a frozen bag of the diced veggies goes in there as well. I cooked up the pasta spirals. You don't want to overcook your pasta because you're going to bake it as well, so you want them sort of al dente. Added the tuna mix and the pasta water as needed into the pan. So I'm using my cast iron big lasagna pan type thing here. Put the pasta in the bottom, added the tuna bake sauce, and then added some pasta water as needed to get it nice and loose in the pan. And I topped it with breadcrumbs. Now, I'm not entirely sure what seasoning were on these breadcrumbs because they were in the freezer and they're just seasoned breadcrumbs. But apparently they had a little bit of heat to them, so who knows, and everyone really enjoyed them. So there's some more in the freezer, but I don't know if I could replicate that again because I have no idea what I put in there. But anyway, I just put the breadcrumbs over the top, sprayed it with a little bit of oil, which will help the breadcrumbs to crisp up a little bit, and then baked it in the oven so that it got all crispy on top and nice and well blended through the pasta, and that was dinner. day 4, I was cleaning out the freezer to try and do my inventory for shopping and stuff to make sure what was in there. I also defrosted it and scraped down all the sides and things like that so it'll work more efficiently. And while I was doing that, I found a frozen corned beef down the bottom of the freezer. So I pulled that out to defrost. So that was the day before. So it was defrosted in the fridge for today. So I cooked it standard. It's just a store-bought Woolworths corned beef or whatever, or Coles or wherever it was from. So I cooked it in the standard way in some water with a bit of malt vinegar, onion, bay leaves, peppercorns, that sort of thing, and just boiled it or simmered it for 90 minutes until it was cooked through. And then I just sliced it up and they could have it with whatever they wanted with lunch. So there was leftover tuna bake as well. They had the silver side, and then I think they might have had some wraps and mayo and stuff like that. I'm not real sure, but I just sliced it all up and gave it to them to have with other leftovers for lunch. For dinner that night, we had hamburgers. So I had made, again, the bread rolls were made, the dough was made the night before. It was shaped this morning, second proofed during the day, and then it was baked in the afternoon, ready to go for dinner. I made a quick bacon and onion jam because I still haven't got around to making my caramelized onion jam that I normally have on the shelf, which we really like on hamburgers. I need to buy some more onions this trip and try and really hard to get and make that. It's a bit of an all-day thing because you have to caramelize the onions. It takes many hours to get it to work, especially if you do it in large quantities. But it's one of those things that if I'm going to put on the shelf, I want to make a large quantity to go on the shelf because it just makes sense. So anyway, yes, need to buy onions. I'll have to remember that. So I just did a basic quick bacon and onion jam, fried off the bacon and the onion in a bit of ghee, put a bit of balsamic, a sprinkle of sugar, and cooked it off till it was all, sweet and crunchy and just yummy. So I did my standard 90-gram-ish balls of beef and used the tortilla press. I did this last time, and it was something that people hadn't always seen. Instead of trying to overhandle the mince, I tend to I mix a bit of salt and onion powder through it, and then I just put a ball in the middle of the tortilla press and press it. So it ends up being this really nice texture, like a smash burger, I suppose, rather than being a minced beef burger. So it works really well, and I really like it. So, and then they end up nice and thin, and then they shrink up in the pan, and they end up being just a really nice texture. So again, it was the sourdough brioche rolls that I had done the night before and baked earlier. So I cut them open and gave the kids the buns and the patties and toppings and let them make their own. There's no salads tonight, unfortunately. This is when we really start missing the garden, not having any fresh lettuce to just go and grab a leaf each for each burger. No tomatoes, though it got down to 0 last night, so most of my tomato plants would be starting to die off, but there probably would have been a few left that we could have harvested from, which would have been nice. Darryl and I like to double-decker make the patties, so I make the patties smaller. I don't do the 90 grams, I do them less, and then cook them up so that we can have double-decker type burgers just because it's a nice treat. And I found some cheese in the freezer when I was doing the inventory. So this was sliced cheese that must have come from one of the hampers because I don't buy sliced cheese myself. And it was sliced burger cheese. So I thought that was just nice that I could grab it out and have that on my burgers. So that was pretty cool. On day 5, for breakfast we did sourdough pancakes. So I do an overnight mix for my pancakes. I actually didn't remember to do it the night before this time, so I only made it up in the morning though, but there's sourdough starter in the pancakes and it gives them a really nice texture. It's better if you let it sit overnight, but same day works as well. The batter probably didn't sit as long as it should have, so they weren't quite as fluffy as I like. The sourdough starter gives them kind of almost a chewy texture, which is nice, but it has to sit long enough to do that, and the kids were, starving apparently because I never feed them. So the kids took over the pancakes as well, and I let them go. I poured the first lot out to get started, and the pan wasn't even hot enough then, and they spread everywhere, and then I just went, oh well, they're eating them so they can make them, that's fine. So they went ahead and did the pancakes. Now because we did pancakes for breakfast, we also did a cooked lunch because pancakes are not enough for Darryl and I as a breakfast, especially not in the quantities that we need to make them. So I think I only had one, and I don't know if Darryl had any of them because they eat them all, and that's fine. That's why they're made. So lunch that day was ham and egg cups. This was requested out of one of my cookbooks. I think it was a quirky cooking cookbook that one of the boys had been looking through, Kavik maybe, had been looking through and asked me to make these again. I have made them once before, or a couple of times before, but they asked me to make them. We didn't have any ham left in the fridge, but Darryl had gone into town that morning to get animal feed, so I got him to buy some ham to make these specifically. So they're just rounds of ham in a muffin tray. You just sort of mold them in. This ham wasn't ideal, but we made it work. And then you crack an egg in it, put a bit of salt and pepper on them, and then put them in the oven. It's really simple. So I just spray oiled the muffin tin, put the ham in the muffin tin, cracked the egg into it, salt and pepper, stuck it straight in the barbecue. So and then once they're cooked, I just pulled them all out and put them on a board for the kids. They like to have them on wraps, like bacon and egg wraps and things like that, or whatever. I didn't mind how they ate them. They'd had pancakes, now they had bacon and egg cups, so they could eat them however they wanted, or ham and egg cups sort of thing. Dinner that night was lemon chicken with steamed coconut rice. So I made my rice as normal in an absorption method in a pot. I do a tin of coconut cream and then water in with the rice up to the first knuckle, stick it on the stove until it comes up to a boil, turn it down to low and let it simmer for 10 minutes, and then turn it off, let it sit for 5 approximately, and then the rice is done. We've done this lemon chicken. I think I might have even done it in the last What We Eat in a Week. It's become a bit of a fan favorite sort of a thing. So all I did was dice the chicken up into bite-sized pieces, and then I marinated it in a bit of ginger, soy sauce and garlic, and then after that I just dip it in potato starch. So I just dip it straight in potato starch from the marinade and then put it in the oil and fry it off, and it ends up super crunchy and tasty. So once it's all fried up, it's nice and crispy, and that I actually only had breasts left here, and they're a bit drier. We much prefer this with thighs, but breast was all I had left in the freezer, and we served it over the rice with some steamed broccoli and then the lemon chung. So the lemon chung I've shown before. It is basically lemon slices and sugar in a jar until the lemon macerates out and you end up with this like lemon syrup. So we just use spoonfuls of that over the chicken, broccoli and rice, and serve it like that. We also have a plum sauce that we like to use in this method as well, but the lemon's definitely the favoured one. I didn't get any footage of it served, but I do have a picture from last time, so I'll just stick this in here because it has become a bit more of a requested dish. So this is what it looks like, generally speaking, anyway. On day 6, we had focaccia for breakfast. So this was again sourdough. It's overnight proof. I've got a video on how I make my focaccia, but again, it'll be covered in the week in my life as sourdough starter as well in the next couple of days too, to show you how I did it all. We like to serve this just with a bit of dipping oil. It's not necessarily the greatest nutritionally dense meal, but we enjoy it. So we use a little bowl, we grate some garlic up, and then put some rosemary out of the garden, olive oil and a bit of balsamic vinegar, and then we just slice the bread up and dip it in there. I also had some salami that was left, and there was some kefir cheese as well, so we had that on the bread as well, but mostly we just like to cut it up warm and dip it in the flavoured olive oil, and it's just super tasty. For dinner that night, we had lasagna soup. So at this point of the month, we're pretty low on meat. That chicken that I made last night was the last chicken that I had left in the freezer. We still have a bit of pulled pork in the freezer, and there's bolognese, and then there's some canned pork on the shelf, and pork soup, sausage soup, and a butter chicken on the shelf too, I think. So it's not like we're running out of food, it's just that we have less diverse choices. So we have plenty of bolognese in the freezer though, because I always make that in bulk because it's a really good fallback. Darryl will probably serve bolognese with pasta while I'm gone, so I'll try and do different things with it while I'm here. So lasagna soup is one of our favourites, and it was a rainy night, so it worked out really well. So I grabbed a bag of shredded carrot and shredded zucchini that was in the freezer, cooked that up with onion, celery, garlic, all that sort of thing. Lots and lots of veggies in there. Then I add a bag of the bolognese. Now my bolognese, I've shown it before, but my bolognese is full of vegetables as well. It has mushroom and bacon and carrot and zucchini and onion and tomato and all that sort of stuff in there. It also has split peas in it, or pearl barley, or lentils, whatever I happen to use that particular time. At the moment it's got chana dal in it. So I pour that in. I add a whole lot of stock. So part of the reason I did this too was because I had a 4-litre container of stock because I'd made dog food the other day. So I had a 4-litre container of stock in the fridge to use for this. So I poured the stock in, as well as a couple of jars of passata. I seasoned it with a bit of Worcestershire sauce, some salt and some pepper and things like that. I cook it well at a low simmer. You want all the veggies to be soft because, you know, it's a soup. So I cooked it it was probably hour and a half at low temperature, just simmered along as it went. I had made pasta dough the day before, so this is sourdough pasta. Again, it's in the sourdough video, we'll go more in depth, but I'd made sourdough pasta the day before. It sits in the fridge overnight, and then I roll it out the next day, or within the next couple of days. So I rolled it out to use today in the lasagna soup. So it doesn't need to be perfect. I still cut it fairly thin, and I just use my pastry cutter that I use and cut it into chunks sort of thing, and to do that. So once you're, and I hung that for a little while to let it dry out a little bit. Now when you're almost ready to serve it, what you need to do is you need to bring it up to a hard simmer or a low boil, and then you need to add your pasta to it. So you want to add your pasta sort of individually, because if you just, especially if it's fresh pasta, because if you just dump it in, it tends to stick together. So you want to add it in to make sure that it gets wet with the soup either side, greases the pasta and doesn't stick together. Put all the pasta in there, and then let it cook until the pasta is the texture that you like. Now, because it's a soup, you want the pasta fairly nice and soft, and the starch from that pasta is going to thicken the soup up even more. So even though it was a bit watery to start with, it'll be thicker by the time the pasta is cooked, because the starch from the pasta is going to thicken the soup as well. It also means that you'll find if you have leftovers and you stick it in the fridge, by the next day it's almost like a bolognese again rather than a soup, but you can just put a splash of stock or something in it if you want to thin it out, again, for leftovers. We don't have huge amounts of leftovers, so it's never really a great problem. We just eat it as is. But adding a little bit of stock or something because we have to warm everything up on a stovetop because we don't have a microwave, adding a bit of extra liquid in there does help. We served it with some chunks of the focaccia that was left from breakfast this morning, so I just cut up what was left into chunks, put it in the bowls with the soup, and served it up like that. The kids really enjoy lasagna soup. It is a favourite, and it's great in winter. We do a lot of soups in winter, so it's definitely one. They just really like soups that have pasta in them. They like macaroni in their chicken soup and things like that, so that it is something they love, and I really enjoy it as well. Then day 7, so the last day of this particular what we eat in a week. In the morning I did sourdough tortillas. So I mixed up some lard tortillas using sourdough starter as part of the mix. It's done all within a couple of hours, so it's not a long fermented thing, but that starter leaves the dough really silky. So even by giving it half an hour rest, it's like an autolyse that you do for your breads. The texture of the dough changes completely, and it's wonderful. As I said, I'll go further into things like this in the sourdough video rather than clutter this one up, but the sourdough tortillas are really, really nice. So I used lard in them as the fat, and I used the Thermomix to knead the dough for me. Initially I just need to bring it together and then cover it up to rest for a bit. As I said, when you rest it with the sourdough starter in there, the texture of the dough changes. A lot of doughs that you make with sourdough start out drier than they would if you weren't using sourdough, because the hydration of the sourdough goes through the dough. Hard to explain. I'll go more in depth in the sourdough video, so if you're interested in that sort of thing, then look at that one. Otherwise we'll just skim over it. So I let it rest for a little bit, put it into small balls, and then let it rest again for a little bit, just to let the glutens relax so that it's easier to roll out. And I needed to heat the pans, and being cast iron pans, they take a little while to heat up anyway. I rolled them really thin, so you want to roll them thin enough that you can see the markings on the dough mat underneath, or if you picked them up you could see through them basically, but you don't want them to tear either. This dough is quite flexible, so it's not so bad. It's hard to tear, to be honest. And then you want to put them on the cast iron pan to cook them. They take very minimal time to cook. They puff up, you pop the bubbles down, flip them over, and they are a really lovely flexible tortilla, that you can roll up into any shape. You can fold them up into balls and they don't tear and things like that. As I cook them, I put them into a tea towel to keep them warm and steamed, because if you put them out dry they end up a little bit crispy. You can just warm them back up, but putting them in a tea towel is a good way to put them, especially when you're making the quantity that I make in one go. So I stuck them in a tea towel to keep warm, and then once they were all cooked, I scrambled some eggs and I put some pulled pork from the freezer. This is the carnina pork that I had in the freezer, through the scrambled eggs, heated that all up, and then we had that on the tortillas. I think the kids had some plum or apple butter barbecue as well. I had mayo. Rolled them up like a breakfast burrito basically, and that's what we had for breakfast / lunch that particular day. For dinner, again, still have quite a few meals of bolognese in the freezer, so I'm looking at different ways of using that as a simple thing. I was busy most of the day, so I got started late as well. So what I decided to do was do basically a hand pie out of the bolognese. So the bolognese has so much veggies in it that I'm happy to use this in a variety of ways, and know that there's some denseness to the nutrition in this particular meal, no matter what I serve it with. So it makes me feel better at times. So I had some puff pastry in the freezer that I had bought last month and hadn't used up yet. So I pulled that out and I basically just made bolognese Kiva cheese hand pies. So I just cut them in half, put the scoop of bolognese in the top, Kiva cheese on top of that, folded it in half, crimped the edges with a fork, and then put a slit in the top so that they could steam out and get nice and crunchy. I mashed up some potatoes. I still have probably one more serve of potatoes after this now left for the month. So we've done quite well on potatoes this month actually. So I mashed potatoes with a bit of ghee and salt, and then I just served the pies over the mashed potato. Probably could have done with a little bit of sauce or something over the top of it maybe, but I don't know what I'd use, unless maybe I could have done like a dairy-free cheese sauce or something. I'm not sure. Probably could have done with a little bit moisture over the top, but anything in pastry is a winner for the kids. So I also had I've got plenty of jars of stewed apple left on the fridge from last year's, left on the shelf from last year's apples that I got really cheap. So I'm trying to get through some of them before we get the next lot of apples. So I also made some triangle apple turnover type things with the puff pastry. Just put the stewed apple, a little sprinkle of sugar because my stewed apples aren't sweetened, and then closed them up with the pastry into triangles, cut a slit on the top, and baked them as well. So then they could have the little apple turnovers for dessert too. And I'll probably use the rest of that jar of apple tomorrow for something. So that was a week of meals at the end of a 6-week shopping haul. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a common theme towards the end of the week. We eat a fair few carbs, and we have a lot less fresh vegetables. We still have frozen vegetables and the food that's already been cooked with vegetables in it. So like the bolognese, I really enjoy the fact that my bolognese has carrot, zucchini, mushroom, onion, garlic, as well as the lentils and the beef and the tomato products and all that in it. So it's a pretty full meal in itself, even if it's only served over pasta or over potato or in pastry or something like that. So that works well. We didn't show a soup meal off the shelf this particular week, but that'll probably happen in the next couple of days as well. So I have pork and vegetable soup, I have vegetable soup, and I have sausage and potato soup on the shelf. I think I have smoked chicken and vegetable soup as well. So the kids really like that. That has diced potato, carrot, celery, onion, garlic, as well as the meat and chicken stock and things like that. And they like to just heat that up and put a bag of macaroni pasta in it and have chicken noodle soup, basically, is what I associate it with. So they will have that over the next few days as well. And we do still have a couple of bags of frozen vegetables in the freezer, but we've run out this month of meat that I would normally serve, like meat mash and veg. Like there's no sausages left. We've got no rissoles or meatballs left either. We're running pretty short on things by the end of the 6 weeks these days. The I'm trying not to increase the budget, but by doing that, we are buying exactly what we need rather than having the surplus. So I'm going to have to spend a little bit extra to get the surplus, because it means that if I didn't get to go shopping this week, if there was a reason that I didn't, we wouldn't starve. Obviously there is food, there is a dozen jars of soup and stuff, there's plenty, and I've got flour, so you know, and sourdough starter, more good, but there isn't the kind of extras that I'd like. Normally I'd like to have a couple of extra jars of pork on the shelf, a couple of extra jars of chicken on the shelf, some extra chicken in the freezer, some meatballs or whatever. I have even been going into my extra mince. So the hamburgers that I made was mince out of the freezer that I had frozen a couple of groceries ago and put down the bottom just as a just in case. I think I've only got a kilo of mince left in the bottom of the freezer too. So we are eating through everything that we buy in our 6-week period at the moment, which is not what we would normally do. Normally that most of that 6-week period would carry on. There is still some carry on, obviously. We have jars of soup on the shelf and things like that. Butter chicken and all, there's still a jar of butter chicken, and that was chicken from this month and things like that. But we're definitely not getting as much bang for our buck at the moment with the price hikes in some of the food. I haven't found anything hugely significant in price hikes, but there's enough small amounts overall that it's impacting. So that's why these videos are kind of good for me as well, because it gives me an assessment of what we're eating at each point of the month and what we might be short on and things like that. I run a pretty tight inventory and stuff as well, but it's also nice to do this and talk it out loud, because sometimes it tells me things that I wasn't even really thinking about. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching, and I will see you again in the next few days before the groceries and getting the last few videos out before we have the grocery haul. So thanks guys, and I will see you next time.